In 1975, a struggling actor sat down and wrote a screenplay in 3.5 days. He was broke. He had appeared in small parts nobody knew about, and by his own account was down to the last few $100s he had in the world. Then, he wrote a boxing movie about a nobody who gets one shot at the heavyweight title. When producers wanted to buy the script, he refused to sell it unless they let him play the lead role himself. They said no, over and over. They wanted every major star in Hollywood instead of him. He kept refusing to sell unless he could star in it. Eventually, they gave in. He got the part. The movie was Rocky. It won Best Picture. It launched one of the most successful film franchises in history, worth an estimated $2 billion at the box office alone, across 8 movies and counting. And to this day, the man who wrote it, starred in it, and directed 4 of its sequels does not own any piece of it. Not the character, not the franchise. Nothing. He raised it with the studio once, back in 1985. By his account, the answer came back in 3 words. You got paid. This is a money story. Let's get into it. To understand why Sylvester Stallone doesn't own Rocky, we have to understand the position he was negotiating from, because it explains everything that came after. He was not a known commodity. He had no leverage. When producers Irwin Winkler and Robert Chartoff came calling with interest in his script, they had a studio deal in place. United Artists would finance whatever project they chose next, as long as the budget stayed under $1.5 million. Rocky fit. Stallone's screenplay sold for $25,000. His acting fee for playing the title role came to $2,000. Total direct payment for writing and starring in what would become an Oscar-winning film, $27,000. He also received what's called net points, a small percentage of the film's eventual profit after the studio recouped its costs. On the first Rocky alone, those points eventually paid out roughly $2.5 million over time. Real money, and meaningfully more than the upfront fee. But what he did not get, and did not ask for, because he didn't fully understand what he was giving up, was any ownership stake in the character or the franchise itself. Winkler and Chartoff owned the rights, and later the studio behind them. Stallone had created Rocky Balboa. He would never own even a single percentage point of him. It's worth being precise about why this happened, because it wasn't exactly a trick. In the mid-1970s, nobody involved, not Stallone, not the producers, not the studio, had any real reason to believe a low-budget boxing picture about a nobody would become a cultural sensation. The producers mortgaged their own homes to keep the budget on schedule. From where they were standing, they were taking on nearly all the financial risk, handing an unproven writer-actor an ownership stake in a film that might lose money entirely would have looked, at the time, like an unnecessary gift. Nobody in that room was pricing in the possibility of a franchise that would still be making movies 50 years later. Here's what makes this different from a straightforward sob story. Stallone wasn't shortchanged on any individual payday. As the franchise grew, so did his fees. He earned $75,000 for Rocky II and $120,000 for Rocky III, on top of his continuing profit participation. By Rocky V, his salary for a single film had climbed to a reported $15 million. When the franchise was revived decades later with Creed, he was paid around $10 million for that film and a similar amount for its sequel. Every one of those numbers is real money for a single job. If you only look at the paychecks, Stallone did extremely well off Rocky in nearly 5 decades. But a paycheck and an ownership stake aren't the same asset, and that's the story's whole lesson. A paycheck pays you once, an ownership stake pays you, or your children, or your children's children, for as long as that thing you built keeps generating money, whether or not you ever do another day of work on it. Stallone got paycheck after paycheck. he never got the second thing. In his own account, he didn't fully grasp the difference until years later, when the fees had grown large enough to obscure what was actually missing underneath them. A particular trap hides in that pattern, and it's worth naming directly. When each individual payday keeps growing, 75,000, then 120,000, then 15 million, it becomes really difficult to feel like you're being shortchanged. The number in front of you is always bigger than the last one. That upward trend is exactly what makes it easy to stop asking the harder question underneath the paycheck. Not, am I being paid well, but do I own any piece of the thing generating all of this? Those are different questions, and a rising fee answers only the first one. He first tried to raise the issue in 1985, ahead of Rocky IV, according to himself, with the trade press. He asked the producers directly. He had written every word, choreographed the fights, been loyal to the franchise for a decade. Didn't it bother them that he didn't own even 1% of it, something he could pass on? And there it is, the 3 words from the top of this story. You got paid. That ended the conversation for decades. Stallone kept working within the arrangement, writing, directing, starring, while the ownership stayed exactly where it had always been. In 2022, with the franchise's producer approaching his mid-90s, Stallone went public with his frustration, repeatedly calling for a share of the rights to be returned so he'd have something to leave his own children. The producer's family did not agree to the request. In an interview not long after, Stallone was asked directly whether the situation would ever change. His answer? No. It's never going to happen. Today, a major studio owns the Rocky franchise. Stallone continues to appear in and produce entries in the world he created on a fee basis, the same way he has for nearly 50 years. It is worth noting what he was not asking for in that 2022 exchange. He wasn't demanding retroactive ownership of the 5 decades of films already made. He said explicitly that he expected the producers to keep their existing share. What he wanted was a stake in whatever came next. New films, in the future, split differently than the arrangement made by a broke 29-year-old in 1975. Even that more modest ask decades later and backed by one of the most bankable names in action cinema went nowhere. It's tempting to listen to this story and conclude that Stallone got a bad deal. That's not quite right, and it's not the useful version of the lesson. He got a fine deal by the standards of an unknown actor with no leverage in 1975, $27,000 plus points, for a movie nobody expected to succeed, made by a studio that was taking a real risk on a nobody. Nobody in that room was cheating him. They were making the deal that made sense, given what everyone believed the film was worth at the time. The problem is what happened after the film succeeded beyond anyone's expectations, and the deal never got renegotiated structurally. The fees grew enormously. The ownership never moved an inch. That's the part worth remembering. Success does not automatically convert a payment arrangement into an ownership arrangement. Those are 2 separate negotiations, and making the first bigger does not substitute for winning the second. A studio that pays you $15 million for one film has every incentive to let you believe you're being treated generously. And by the standard of a single paycheck, you are. It's a different question entirely from whether you own any piece of what that paycheck is attached to. It also explains why the producer's response, "You got paid," felt to them like a complete and reasonable answer. In their accounting, it was genuinely complete. He had been paid on time, at rates that climbed with every installment, exactly as the contract specified. The contract never specified an ownership stake, so nothing remained owing under its terms. The disagreement was never really about whether Stallone had been compensated. It was about whether compensation was ever going to be the right currency for what he'd actually built. Compare this to George Lucas, who asked for the rights nobody valued at the very moment he had leverage, before the film's success was proven. Stallone had less leverage at that moment than Lucas did, and by the time he had more of it, after Rocky's success was undeniable, the ownership question had already been decided, and asking again 40 years later was not the same as asking on day one. The window to negotiate ownership is usually smaller than it feels, and it tends to close well before anyone realizes it has. If this one hit you, hit subscribe, because next time we're telling you about someone who did the opposite of everything you just heard. She owned her work outright. Nobody had to tell her what a copyright was worth. And when she died, she left instructions behind. She'd written them out herself, by hand, more than once. That turned out to be the problem. It took 5 years, 3 of her children on opposite sides of a courtroom, and finally a jury, deliberating for less than an hour. To work out which piece of handwriting counted, they found one under a couch cushion. You don't want to miss it.